Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And a big welcome, whether you're watching on television, listening on the radio, if you're here in our audience, or indeed if you're on our panel tonight. The Conservative Environment Secretary, Elizabeth Truss, who's a campaigner to remain in the EU. Labour MP Frank Field, campaigning to leave. From UKIP, which won the 7 seats for the first time in the Welsh Assembly only 4 weeks ago, their newly elected leader, Neil Hamilton. Plaid Cymru's first woman MP at Westminster, Liz Saville-Roberts, and the left-wing writer and columnist, Owen Jones. Thank you very much. Thanks very much. And before we take our first question, Facebook, Twitter, text, all buzzing 83981 on text to comment on what's being said. Oh, and sorry for the glitch last week. The picture and sound, for some reason, were out of sync at the beginning of the programme, voices and mouths moving at a different pace. It wasn't the fault of your equipment, it was our fault, and I hope it's okay this week. Right, let's have our first question. Jasmine Ellis has it, please. Jasmine.
Will leaving the EU increase my chances of getting on the property ladder or decrease them?
The property ladder. Remember that George Osborne said that property prices could fall by up to 18% if we left. Who'd like to start on this one? Neil Hamilton.
Well, the principal driver of property price increases in recent years, of course, has been the massive uncontrolled levels of immigration. We're adding to our population every single year on the government's official figures, 1/3 people. So we're adding a city the size of Cardiff to the population of the UK every single year. And if you increase the demand for property whilst the supply remains largely constant, then prices are bound to increase. And there are many other reasons, of course, why property prices have been increasing as well, all to do with restrictions on planning, etc. But fundamentally, it's a population problem. You know, England, in particular, is one of the, and I'm referring to England as distinct from the UK, is one of the most densely populated countries in the EU. It now has over 400 people per square kilometre, compared with only 229 in Germany, 121 in France. And as most of the population increase that we've had has been concentrated, and the house price increase has been concentrated in England and the southeast in particular, that has been the principal driver of it. So
but are you saying to Jasmine, what are you saying to Jasmine? You want us to leave the EU. What are you saying to Jasmine? Are you saying that the property ladder will give her a better chance to buy a house?
I think it will. I'm not suggesting it's the answer entirely to the problem. Okay. George Osborne's quantitative easing policy has also vastly increased the amount of money in circulation, which has also fed into property prices.
All right.
But that's a different question altogether.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions about the EU, but this specific one we thought we'd take first. Owen Jones, what's your view?
Well, firstly, I would strongly reject the idea that the housing crisis in this country was caused by immigrants or by the European Union, and we let politicians off the hook when we blame foreigners for the failure of governments in this country to build the housing that we desperately need. It is blame. It is blame. Now, I should say, as a disclaimer, I was a floating voter to begin with in this referendum, and I genuinely considered the case for Brexit. But I am sick of scaremongering on both sides, and I think we should have a reasoned debate, whether it be threats of World War III on the one hand, or Adolf Hitler and the Nazis on the other.
Can you answer Jasmine's question, please?
Well, the problem with the housing crisis, as I've said, wasn't caused by immigrants. We're building now, in terms of this government's record, the government, of course, which Liz Truss is part of, this government's house-building record is the lowest now in peacetime in England and Wales. We're not building the housing that this country desperately needs. We're not building council housing. 5 million people languish in social housing waiting lists. We're not regulating the private rented sector. People like me, I'm not on the housing ladder like a lot of people probably a bit younger than me. I know I look about 12, but I'm actually 31, and I'm far from that, being even on the housing ladder myself. And we've got to stop a situation where we blame people, whether they be from abroad or Brussels, because all Neil Hamilton wants us to do, posing as he does and UKIP as anti-establishment, is let politicians off the hook in this country because of their failure to build the housing that we desperately need.
Let me go... OK. Jasmine, are you getting near the answer to the questions, or are they avoiding answering your question, do you think?
I think Owen's answering my question. I do believe it is the Conservatives' fault for not building more housing. The fact that we aren't building any council houses is ridiculous, and we're not doing anything to stop the rent prices.
Can I just address that issue? Because the fact is that our government, over the past 5 years, built more council houses than Labour did over their 13 years in office. So that is simply not true. We do recognise there's an issue with housing. We do recognise there's an issue with housing. We've got a pledge to build 1 million more houses over the course of this Parliament. I sit on the Housing Committee to work on making sure that happens. But we need to make sure that the planning system works in people's favours. We're developing neighbourhood plans to do that. And Owen is absolutely right. This is an issue about UK government policy. And one of my big fears about leaving the EU is not only the massive damage we do to our economy and the impact on young people and the opportunities and the ability to get a job and the ability to move around Europe. It's also the fact that we would divert attention from what are the really challenging issues we face as a country, which is helping people get on the housing ladder, helping improve our education system, investing in the health service. Those are the critical issues people care about. And talking about Europe as though it's responsible for those problems is a massive diversion away.
We need to build a house or a flat every 7 minutes.
Issues.
To cope with the increase in demand from immigration.
Liz Truss, it was your Chancellor who said, as a warning, that house prices could fall by up to 18%, Treasury advice, if we left the EU. Wouldn't that be a good thing for people? Isn't that what she wants? Isn't that what people want to get on the housing ladder? It would be an
extremely bad thing for this country to go into recession, to have serious price shocks, to have investor uncertainty with the consequent impact on people's jobs. And we're talking about 500,000 jobs. Nobody wants to see that instability and uncertainty. What we want to see is more houses being built so that young people can get on that housing ladder and people can have those opportunities.
Frank, I'll come to you. Let's just hear from one or two more members of our audience. You there in black, the woman there.
I've just heard in the news recently that the Conservatives are increasing the right to buy scheme into more social housing. So surely that's reducing our social housing stock rather than trying to increase it and help the people who are in need.
Frank Field.
Well, the answer to Jasmine is not trust what the Chancellor Exchequer says.
Because he lies, or what?
No, I'm sure he believes when he says it. But if you actually look at his record, his budgets hardly last a day before they start actually unravelling. So I'm sure he means well when he says house prices are going to fall by 18%. But Jasmine, I hope you'll be actually deciding how you vote, the destiny of this country on other reasons than you might actually get on the property ladder, important as that is. But again, this divide in politics, polarising. Both answers from Owen and Neil are right. If we actually want more people housed, we need to build many more houses. But if you build many more houses and a third of 1 million people, new people, come here to live, it actually makes it very difficult for the people who are already waiting. So there's a number of issues here which bear on it. But I hope nobody's going to decide the fate of this country on a George Osborne assertion that if you vote to come out, house prices will fall by 18%.
Okay. You, sir.
Every government keeps saying we've got to build more houses for the immigrants coming over here. What do they want? They want no green belts? Will it be concrete jungles from London down to Cardiff? We've got to have space for people to breathe, not just bricks and mortar.
Liz Savile-Roberts.
Well, speaking as the only person on the panel who lives in a house in Wales, I'd also like to know... I'd also like to note with some dismay that the only Welsh Assembly member here kicked off on immigration, and that housing is actually a devolved matter, and I would have expected some reference to that, as he is now a member of that body. Now, immigration, given that 95% of the population of Wales were born in the United Kingdom, immigration here is not so much a problem as migration, and the property ladder is very much a factor in that here. We have an aged housing stock that desperately needs improvement. We have a lack of social housing, and in the area I represent we also have the factor of second homes pushing up the prices. So what I would say for us, the property ladder, for the people that I know, people that I represent in Wales, it's developing the economy that counts. And there's, without a shadow of a doubt, Wales would be worse off if we were to leave the EU. It's our economy.
Right. Enough for the moment on housing. Let's go on to our next question on the EU. I said we had a lot, and I know a lot of you want to talk about it. Zina Blundell, please. Oh, just before I say that. Just before. Sorry, Zina. Hold on a second. I should announce where we're going to be next, because I did at the stage. Folkestone next week, York the week after that, and 2 extra programmes before the vote. Nottingham with Michael Gove, Milton Keynes with David Cameron. So if you want to come to any of those 4 programmes, there's the address if you want to make a note of it. But I hope to stay to the end of the programme, and I'll give the figures again. Zina Blundell, your go.
Isn't it true that no one really knows the effects of us leaving the EU because no country has ever left before?
Liz Truss.
That is true, in that we don't know what would happen. We don't have any positive alternatives in terms of trading arrangements that have been proposed. But what we do know is that being part of the EU has delivered huge economic prosperity to our country. Being part of that single market, having access to those 500 million people, has meant that we've been able to trade, that we've been able to do much more business. That means more jobs, more investment in our companies, it means more income for our people, and it ultimately means more money in all of our pockets. So if you look at the example of a business like Wyke Farms, who I met today in Somerset, they sell their cheese right through the EU. Because we are part of the single market, they use the same labels in their products that they sell in France, that they sell in Britain. It means they can expand their business, they can take more people on. That means that Somerset farmers do better, who supply them with the milk. It means that the local corner shop is doing better because people have money in their pockets to spend. So that single market is vitally important for our prosperity as a country. And what we do know is that if we left that single market, which is what the Out campaign are proposing to do, we would see less trade, we'd see less investment. Many companies have said that they invest in the UK because of access to those 500 million people. And we would see a real impact on our incomes, not just the short-term recession, which is going to last a year at least, and economists are predicting, but a real long-term impact on the level of income we'd get, the opportunities that our young people would have, and the jobs available. So I think we do know that. We know that trade is good, and moving away from that relationship, becoming a more inward-facing country, is going to make us all poorer.
All right, Frank Field. Isn't it true no one really knows the effects of leaving because no one has left before?
I think Zina's absolutely right. And that one of the unknowables about this is nobody's left before, and certainly not one of the major players has left before. And the effects of us on day 2 after the referendum, when whoever wins either side, there will be renegotiations. We literally don't know what the consequences of that will be, and I think there are dangers there, and maybe later in the programme we'll come on to this. But I don't think this sort of reciting of facts here, there and everywhere, which nobody knows whether they're true, I'm sure people utter them believing they're true. On referendum day, you're not going to make up your minds on some politician gave you a whole series of facts. Our very being has actually prepared us for this day, our history, our backgrounds, our knowledge, and we'll be making a decision about the destiny of our country. And while, of course, we have to go through this poetry, of politicians thinking we're important and boring you with programmes and facts and all sorts of stunts.
Steady on. The programmes have been rather exciting.
Well, I think maybe for some it's been rather exciting. But what it does do is, in a sense, sound everybody that we're now moving to that stage where the nation itself will make a decision about our destiny. And I don't think sets of facts are going to help anybody do that.
So you're asking, you're asking people to vote Brexit without having any knowledge of the effects of leaving, what it will be. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is we do not know the consequences of leaving. I mean, the idea that, in fact, this group of countries will actually behave in a vicious way to us, it may be that they will spite their own face to be nasty to us, or it might be that they get more out of our membership than we actually, in trade, gain from them, and they'd actually want some sort of deal and want it very quickly.
But it's a leap in the dark, is the way you put it.
No, I'm not any. It's not actually at all. It's actually about a country making a decision about its destiny. The real danger is none of what's being discussed. Is that given Mr. Cameron only gave you the vote because he needed to keep the Tory party together, that vote is being denied to other people in Europe. And the worry of this old elite that runs Europe must be that when other countries see how you exercise the vote, they will actually similarly demand a vote, and that we would then be beginning to see goodbye the European Union as we know it today.
Zina, I'll come to you. You asked the question, you're looking perplexed.
I just want somebody to actually say, these are the guarantees of our continued sovereignty, that we won't lose any more sovereignty.
We can't.
And these are the guarantees of our economy, one way or the other.
Okay.
These are the guarantees that will protect our NHS in the future, 5 years from now. And nobody's coming out with anything that will firmly convince me that you can offer those guarantees.
Owen Jones,
There are things that we do know, and one of the issues at stake is workers' rights. And Frank, I've got a huge amount of respect for Frank, and he's a member of the Labour Party. A MP exists to represent the interests of working people. And those rights were fought for at great cost. And you were the first Labour MP here, Keir Hardie, I named my cat after him, I should be honoured. But the point about EU membership, we have certain rights for workers that are guaranteed as part of that membership. And the point of having them Europe-wide is to prevent a race to the bottom. And some of those are rights that you will depend on. Paid annual leave, for example, for part-time workers, who are mostly women, to have the same rights as full-time workers. Many of you will be worried about undercutting of wages. Well, under our membership of the EU, agency workers have to have the same rights as full-time workers. What do we seriously think will happen if we leave the European Union under this Conservative government? Well, I have a good idea. Those rights will burn on a bonfire lit by a new Conservative Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. We can't allow that to happen. In my opinion, the red line for me in this referendum was the rights and security of working people, and you can't trust a Conservative government if we leave to protect the rights we have.
Hold on, no, come back. No, wait, we've had your say. You have to take, I know you're Secretary of State, but you have to take your turn with the other panellists. Yeah. Neil Hamilton.
Well, I think that neatly encapsulates the choice. It's if we can have a democracy in this country or not. We may well think that the workers' rights so-called legislation in the EU is perfect and it's what we want to keep forever. But if the British people decided in a general election that they didn't want that particular scheme, shouldn't they have the right to vote for a government that was going to change it? And similarly, if you don't like the results of those changes, you could then vote that government out again, and then that legislation was changed. This is what democracy is all about. The Labour government in the 1970s introduced the Employment Protection Act, 1975. We had workers' rights before we joined the EU as well. No, but it's an evolving process, isn't it? To go back to what Zina asked in her question was, what do we know about the future? We know that the future is inherently uncertain, whether we're in or out. Who knows how the Eurozone is going to develop, and the catastrophe...
We're not part of the Eurozone.
The catastrophe that has unfolded, which is enveloping the whole of Europe, which is the biggest attack on workers' rights in Europe, 49% youth unemployment in Greece, 47% in Spain, 39% youth unemployment in Italy. This is a political project which has been controlled by an unelected body of international civil servants and people that we have no control over. We don't elect them, we can't dismiss them, and yet they make our laws. I think it's an absolute disgrace that this country has given away the power of its elected politicians to make our laws, people who we have a right to elect and people whom, if we don't like them, we can dismiss.
All right.
Can I just...
So, Liz, yes?
Forgive me, because I have every respect for concerns about sovereignty, but when people start talking about unelected officials, I just think of the House of Lords, and where do we stand with that? Now, what strikes me too, and people
do they have the same powers as the European Parliament or the Commission?
We have many aspects of sovereignty. We have the EU, we've had devolution has changed the sovereignty of the Houses of Parliament. The Supreme Court has changed the rules of the House of Lords. There are many aspects. We pay 2% of our GDP to NATO, heaven knows. We work within a global community. We have to work with each other. But if I could come back to what you were talking about, Zena, with the way that we're presented with these facts.
No one knows the effects, were her actual words.
No one knows the effects. Well, in all honesty, this is true, and I'm sure people do find it's very frustrating to have these facts thrown at us which don't stand up. And actually what we're being challenged to do here is, who do we actually believe the most? And it is that leap of faith. And I think part of the fear and this fact-mongering, we really need to be helping people to make these decisions. Who do you believe the most?
Well, who do you believe?
For myself, for Wales,
apart from yourself,
which most does does done well out of the infrastructure funding from Europe. I have to be convinced, and I am not, that Westminster would replicate that. Again.
So you put your trust in Brussels rather than Westminster?
Well, so far, Wales has done, to the tune of 245 million per annum, better out. It gets more out of Europe than it pays in.
I don't know that.
So in the infrastructure funding, I have to believe that will be replicated from Westminster. And although I've only been an MP for a year, I find that difficult to believe. Even more so, 80% of our farmers receive varying amounts, many of them considerable amounts of their income through the Common Agricultural Policy. We have two governments, two parties in government for the last 40 years who have done their level best to argue against the Common Agricultural Policy budget. So for Welsh farmers, I cannot, particularly for stock, sheep and cattle farmers, see a better off future for them.
To respond to Neil's point directly, I mean, look, I believe in another Europe is possible. I'm not defending the status quo. And one of the things, just to show how we can change the European Union, because it has to change, it has to be democratised, this government was the biggest cheerleader for something called the Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership. Some of you will have heard of it, negotiated in secret between Brussels and the United States to give large corporations the ability to sue elected governments in secret courts for policies they don't like. And there was no bigger cheerleader than this government. But because people protested and campaigned here and all over Europe, we not only got an exemption for the NHS forced on this government against their will, but because people protested and campaigned all over Europe, TTIP now lies in ruins. Don't let anyone say we can't change the European Union. If we make our voice heard, which is the only way you ever get change, I don't think Britain's perfect, I want to change it, that doesn't mean I want to leave it. The only way we do it is by organising together, making our voice heard, and taking on a political elite that wants to take away our rights. Here in England.
So, Liz, I'll come to you in a moment, but let's just take some members of our audience. You, sir, on the gangway there.
If we were a country not part of the EU, and the upcoming referendum was a vote to join the EU, does the panel think it would be a good idea to join an organisation that's quite clearly corrupt and riddled with fraud?
Liz Truss. If you were out, would you go in?
I think the deal of being in the single market is incredibly valuable for our country, and it delivers a huge amount. Having a market of 500 million people that we can sell our goods to, that we can trade with, is very important. And Britain has the best of both worlds. We're not part of the Eurozone, so the issues that Neil were talking about don't apply to us. We've got a growing economy. We're not part of the Schengen border-free zone. We've got an exemption from ever closer union. We are in a very, very good position, and frankly, I think it would be difficult for another country to negotiate the position we're in now with respect to Europe, having access to the single market, which is incredibly valuable and does deliver huge benefits. So investors from overseas, we're a huge attractor of foreign direct investment. Car companies like Nissan know that they can sell their cars across the European Union. That's really, really important.
But what do you say about the democratic issue, which is what the Brexit people have been arguing, Frank in his way and Neil in his way?
I can answer this. I sit on two different European councils, the Environment Council and the Agriculture Council. We discuss the rules that are decided at a European level. I talk to my counterparts across the European Union. Now,
what percentage of the votes do you have?
Of course, we have to come to agreements and come to compromises.
What percentage of the vote do you
we have a very important influence. So let me give you an example, Neil. The Common Fisheries Policy. Previously, we were throwing away dead fish into the sea because they were over quota.
Why can't we control the fisheries policy entirely ourselves?
Because we share the oceans.
Not
because we share the English
because
Channel.
We're in the EU.
Because we share the English Channel, regardless of whether we were in or out of the EU, we would have to do deals with other countries because we share those things.
Before all of this, we had a fishing industry.
Yeah.
Well, you're talking about whether they're throwing dead fish.
The common fisheries policy is the biggest ecological disaster.
Can I finish this point?
Let him just make the point. Let Frank make his point, because he was picking up on something you said.
Okay.
But I just think this is all tending to the details. I mean, the question or the intervention there was whether, if we now know what we do know, whether we would actually join. And Liz is saying it's brilliant because being in Europe, we've made sure that fish aren't thrown overboard. Dead. At one time, we had a thriving fishing industry before we decided everybody else should share our fishing fields. So I think on the whole question of this, and the gentleman there was making a really valid point, that I can't remember the last time when your money was accounted properly in Europe and was signed off by the auditors. They actually cannot justify how they're spending your money. So I'd have thought on that basis, which is a different question from the one that Zena asked us, because we're actually in, whether in fact we'd go in if we, knowing what we now know. It doesn't actually help with Zena's point, which is the key thing, whether in fact, through all this mist of facts being thrown all over the place, people get enough information to make a secure decision for the future of their country.
Right. What I'd like is for the panel is to listen to half a dozen voices from the audience, and then you can pick up on any of the points that you like. The woman in yellow there, please, first.
Right, you said that we don't know the consequence of coming out, but we certainly know the consequence of staying in, because the population of Scotland by 2023 will infiltrate through the whole of the country. And how is our NHS and our schools going to deal with it?
OK, we'll keep that point, the immigration one. You in the front in blue.
You say we're in a good position being in Europe. I don't believe we're in a good position when we've got 28 bureaucrats lecturing us on how we run our country.
OK. And you.
I think all the politicians throughout the whole in-out debate need to remember they're gambling with real people's lives. I'm 21, I'm a graduate just out of university, and it's going to be, if we come out, it's going to be my generation that will be dealing with the proper effects in 10, 15 years' time. And it's not just tittle-tattle, you're dealing with real people's lives.
What do you make of the debate so far and the arguments you've heard?
I think it's been a lot of tit-for-tat, and there's not been any really constructive arguments that have come to light. And I don't think it's fair that we're being asked, the Brexit campaigners are asking us to vote for something that we don't know the consequences of. They're forgetting, I think, that we're playing with real people's lives.
OK. And the man in the blue shirt, very back there.
Well, there's no guarantee in the future that if we do leave the EU, that we won't have immigration controls ourselves. Any negotiations in the future will obviously involve the free movement of people.
OK. And let me take one more point. You there in the second row, you, sir.
OK. Both sides of the argument have come to an agreement that we need a single market, whether we are in or out. But the Brexiters say we will be able to negotiate using the single market and not have controls on on the number of, on free movement of people. I just want to know if that's true.
All right. Well, we take the immigration issue. Neil Hamilton, you start on this.
Well, the key point is that the lady in yellow made that unless we recover control of our borders and we in this country decide who we want to come and live and work here from abroad, then we're not going to be able to control the speed and flow of immigration. And nobody is saying that immigration should be completely stopped, far from it. But we cannot cope with the scale and speed of current immigration. As I said earlier on, we're adding a city the size of Cardiff to our national population in the UK every single year. And this is set to continue for the foreseeable future. 1 million extra people every 3 years. How are we going to cope with this? How are our public services going to cope with the speed of the change?
Right.
And the wage compression, to go back to a point that Owen was making earlier on, an attack on workers' rights, what greater attack could there be than to depress wages at the lowest points on the income scale so that the minimum wage becomes the maximum wage for millions and millions of people?
Because more people are coming in and taking the job. All right, Liz, what do you say? What do you say to that point?
What I think frightens a number of people listening to this sort of discussion is how immigration has become the shorthand for very legitimate concerns, very, very legitimate concerns about the economy and employment and security. And one of perhaps the great tragedies of the Labour Party is that they've let immigration become a toxic subject to the point we're now discussing it like this, and it's played into parties such as UKIP's hands. Now, evidently, when we look at the economy, look at employment and security, aren't we surely better off working with our neighbours in Europe? The main concern for migration is it's not the EU migrants which we're discussing here, it's the migrants who are coming from beyond Europe, sub-Saharan Africa, from the Middle East, from conflict situations. How are we dealing with that? We are playing on very genuine fears.
That's a very small part of it.
We're playing in very genuine fears here. But I do fear that the consequences when we're talking about immigration is something we need to be very careful with.
Do you want to come in on this? Yes?
My understanding of it is that in terms of the third of a million that's quoted as coming in, half of those are people that are not from the European Union. And if we needed to control that badly, why don't we control the number of non-EU immigrants coming in and then reduce the pressures that way?
Frank Field.
The figures are the third of a million, over 250,000 actually from Europe. I mean, those are the government's actually own figures on this. But I do think this whole question about immigration, I don't quite view it like Liz. I mean, I think it's a very legitimate question, partly because it's not just about immigration. The issue
That's exactly what I said, to be fair.
Well, well, let me then take the argument on, because it is about who controls what, who's coming, how budgets are spent. And if you have no control over your borders, as we've not had as far as Europe's gone since Labour opened the borders in 2004, we've seen wages pushed down, so my poorest constituents have lost out. There's real shortage on housing, difficulties with schools, and pressure on the NHS. Now, of course, in a lovely world, we could say you taxpayers will cough up even more money and mitigate these effects. But it's very difficult to win an election and persuade you to spend more money in this particular way. So I think this is a key question because it sums up about whether we control our country or not. It's focused on the borders because that's a very real one. It affects people's lives. And if you're well-to-do in this country, if you're upper middle class, you've never had it so good. You've got a servant class that the Edwardians have had. If you're at the bottom of the pile, you're the ones that have lost out. You're the ones who are actually looking to UKIP. And my worry about this election campaign is that people who normally vote Labour will feel, because of the sort of campaign, whatever it is we're putting forward, that somehow they'll be disloyal as Labour voters to vote to come out. My message is, you actually totally loyal, vote to come out. That is not a reason for changing parties, as 1 million Labour supporters last time who deserted us on this issue and went to UKIP.
All right. Well, this is a. I know everybody's got more things to say and more arguments, but this brings us exactly to what Owen Burry wants to ask.
Okay. With his half-hearted support for Remain, Is Jeremy Corbyn secretly hinting to the British people that we should leave the EU?
Is Jeremy Corbyn hinting to the British they leave exactly what Frank Field would like? Owen Jones, is that happening?
No, I don't think so. And I think the problem is the press has framed this whole debate as being an argument between two rival Conservative factions. And frankly, this is one of the biggest decisions
about
we're
the
making.
Labour Party.
But the press
the
are focused on
Conservative
this.
Party.
I think what's happening now is Jeremy Corbyn is making the point, I presume, and I think now the campaign has started in earnest, that we need to stay in the European Union to change it, not to uncritically support what we've got. And a key point of that, I think, was that point about the NHS, which I really wanted to address, which I think really links to that, because I think one of the things Labour's going to be talking about is the NHS, because Vote Leave keep talking about it. Vote Leave is stuffed full of people who are ideologically opposed to the very existence of a publicly run NHS. The NHS does have a clear and present danger, which Labour voters should be concerned about, and it's on this very panel. Liz Truss, her government, the longest fall in spending on the NHS since its foundation.
I get quite impatient with panellists who don't answer the question but go off on a riff of their own.
But no, this is a critical...
The question was about Labour, and you will know the figures that suggest, I want to stick with this, that Labour, people who say they vote Labour, 45% of them say they don't know whether Labour wants them to stay in or to exit.
And
that was the question.
I think people on the left and Labour generally need to make our voices a lot louder heard now, because we're in the middle now of the referendum proper. So yes, of course, I don't know what to say. I'm not the representative of Jeremy Corbyn. I want him and the Labour Party to... He did a speech just today. I want far more speeches on it. But the point is, as I've said, what they need to talk about are issues that actually affect people, that are at stake. And a Leave campaign... I mean, look, Neil Hamilton here is somebody who opposes the existence of the NHS. He wants it private. You said, this is what you said it was a more effective killing machine than the Taliban, a Soviet-style nationalised monolith. There's a lot at stake. The NHS is one of them. And I want Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour leadership to say exactly what's at stake, and that's including NHS and workers' rights.
Liz Truss.
Well, I welcome Jeremy Corbyn taking an active part in this campaign. I appeared on a platform with Ed Miliband talking about the benefits of the EU for the environment, because we share our air, we share our seas, we share wildlife across Europe. It's important that we protect the environment. I'm very pleased that the Labour Party is working with us on those campaigns.
Wouldn't share a platform with you because he thinks it's disloyal
He is making his case in his own way, and I think one of the benefits of the Remain campaign is we do have people... I believe in free trade. That is why I am part of the Remain campaign. I think it has delivered huge prosperity. I think it delivers more jobs. I think we have more opportunities. I've got 2 daughters. I want them to live in an outward-facing Britain that is open to working with other countries collaboratively, where they have opportunities across Europe. That's why I'm for remaining. Lots of other people have lots of other reasons. You've heard Owen's reasons. You've heard Liz's reasons. It's a campaign that is very cross-party, whereas what we're seeing on the Leave campaign... I'm a huge admirer of Frank, done fantastic work on early intervention. I don't agree with you on this issue, but I do think that a lot of the Leave agenda is about drawing our country in, isolating ourselves, not working with other countries, which we do successfully.
All right.
We are working with them rather than working against them.
The man in green there, you, sir.
I think that given that Jeremy Corbyn had one of the highest mandates ever, and I just think that it's a shame that he's not speaking louder. We've got the previous leader of the Labour Party who has a higher profile in this campaign than the current leader of the opposition.
Liz Roberts, what do you make of it? Are you surprised you won't share a platform?
The fact this week that Jeremy Corbyn was on holiday again, and that...
does he take a lot of holidays for your taste?
There seems to be there are holidays taken when it is perhaps opportune. And I think on the one hand, looking at it from the outside,
can you speak straightforward? You're saying he's dodging the column by going away when he thinks it's inappropriate or unfortunate?
I think he certainly could be speaking, he could be more outspoken than he is.
All right.
I think that the Labour Party is unfortunately indulging in ideological navel-gazing, while perhaps one of the main Brexit personalities is using this as an extended job interview for the PM job.
He did a speech today, and the only thing the press spoke about that speech and its contents was the fact people heckled at it when a BBC reporter spoke, rather than talking about what he said. I think it is true that the Labour leadership have decided not to share a platform with Conservative politicians. But they're trying to learn the lessons of Scotland, because what happened there was Conservatives and Labour stood together. That alienated a lot of Labour voters and helped allow it to be presented as establishment stitch-up. What Labour has to do
sorry,
is
are
not
they
defend-
right to do that? I mean, or is Sadiq Khan right to go and stand on a platform?
I've nothing, but I
in
think
your view?
Sadiq Khan has his own mandate. It's up to him what he does. I have a lot of respect for him.
Labour man. I mean, do you want to see Labour refusing to go alongside Tories on platforms or not?
The position I lean towards is that they shouldn't do that for the reasons I said in Scotland. But nonetheless, you know, at the end of the day, the real issue is that Jeremy Corbyn needs to make the case not for what we're being offered, but for a different, more democratic Europe running the interest of the majority.
Well, to be fair, what I would like to see is more passion in this. Now, I can be passionate about this for Wales because the case is black and white. I see what we stand to lose. But we stand to lose with workers' rights, with women's rights, with a whole aspect of the better Europe that we could be hoping for. And I would expect far greater leadership on the part of the Labour Party.
We're on the Labour Party. You, sir, with the... Yes.
Firstly, the panel are just taking cheap shots off each other and off each other's parties. And I think it's a simple fact of numbers. If you stop immigration, whether from Europe, whether from Africa, whether Brazil, you can then afford to build the houses that are required for the people who are homeless, for the hospitals, for schools, roads, etc. Stop the people coming in, sort out what we've already got. Charity begins at home.
Frank Field?
Well, I'm not disagreeing with that, but the question was about Jeremy Corbyn and his role. I don't think Jeremy wishes to or could play a decisive role in this campaign. He came into the House of Commons after I came into the House of Commons. Every time we were protecting, he and I were protecting workers' rights in the way that Owen talks about, we were in the same lobby against what the European Union was actually doing, and now we've had this Pauline conversion. So why should anybody pay any attention when you've got such a track record of being suspicious of this super state, of taking power away from you, of treating people in a totally disregarded fashion. Therefore, I don't think he plays a role at all. My worry is, which is David's point, about first of all, a very, very large portion of Labour voters don't even know where the party is. I actually think for once that's an advantage, given the position that the party is actually trying to put forward. And I'm also thinking forward to the next election. This is incredibly important, as Zina raised in her question at the very beginning, about the destiny of this country. But I'm also thinking, after referendum day, we get on with the business of trying to unite the government and the country together again, and our focus will be then on the next election. And
to unite the government? To unite the government?
I think one of the functions of the government after this, its performance has been so pathetic. I think there'll be a new Prime Minister, and the job of the new Prime Minister will be trying to get the governing party together, and in the negotiating team that will have to be established to take forward the ragbag of ideas the Prime Minister brought back from Europe, because they're not negotiated yet. We actually need a negotiating team that unites the country. My worry, however, is that throughout the whole of this process, a large proportion of Labour voters will feel that nobody is speaking on their behalf. I mean, Liz has spoken very powerfully on behalf of her two daughters. Her two daughters, thank God, are in a different position to the lots of daughters in my constituency who are not as privileged, who are not at the top of the tree as her daughters are, with all that goes with that, are at the bottom of the pile. It's what is actually going to happen to those and whether they feel they're being represented in this debate. And I think people will feel, yet again, the Labour Party has actually failed to deliver, of putting it very clearly that we're on the side of those who have least in our society, and we're prepared to fight for those people.
Yes. Now, but just sorry, I'll come to this. You were talking as though you thought that Cameron was going to win this referendum.
I think whether he win or loses... You
were talking as though you thought he was going to win.
No, I wasn't. I actually do think whatever the performance on the polling day itself, that his whole strategy was you can negotiate from strength inside Europe. Well, I bet nobody could tell us the 6 points on the little sheet he brought back, what he'd actually negotiated. The idea that was a strategy has failed.
Right.
That he's, I think, in a sense of, has collapsed the Remain campaign. It's now run from Downing Street. He's so upset the way it performed. We haven't got two independent. And I do think, come the day after, I'd be very, very surprised if he has a long length of life as Prime Minister.
Right, the woman up there, I'll come to you, Liz. Yes.
I'd like to follow on from Frank's point. He talks about many people in our society who perhaps feel disenfranchised. Isn't part of the issue that these are not the people that are going to come out and vote? Half of them aren't registered to vote. How do we encourage people to come out and vote?
Neil Hamilton.
Well, one of the things that UKIP has done since it became a mainstream political party is to re-engage people who had long since given up on all the old parties and had stopped voting. There are a lot of people who vote for us who haven't voted for many, many years, if ever. And what UKIP has done in Wales in particular is we are the party that is now providing opposition to the Labour Party. Plaid are effectively in bed with the Labour Party in government in Wales, if I can use that phrase. And it's,
you've just used it. Yeah, you used the phrase, and you used the phrase concubines, which is rather frowned on before.
UKIP is now the runner-up to Labour in places which were once impregnable seats, like Merthyr Tydfil, Ebbw Vale. We got 25% of the vote from nowhere in the last general election, and we will take more votes in areas like that.
Can we come back to the referendum?
Yeah, and part of the reason why UKIP is doing this is that, you know, Jeremy Corbyn is a great disappointment to me, actually. I was elected the same day as a Member of Parliament as Jeremy Corbyn, and I voted with him in the lobbies many times on European issues over the years, because I'm a long-term Eurosceptic, but I may be the oldest living Eurosceptic, having joined the Anti-Common Market League in 1967.
So you see Corbyn as an absolute confirmed Brexiter who can't afford to say it.
I think he's been kidnapped. I think he's been kidnapped by the establishment. He was going to make a speech on Turkey the other day. He was going to make a speech on Turkey the other day, saying how monstrous it is that we're demonising Turkey, who should be regarded as a fully European country, and Turks should be able to come here without let or hindrance, as the EU wants, and as David Cameron and the Conservative government wants. And he was pulled from making that speech for fear that it would scare the horses and people would be voting against the EU.
Let Liz Truss defend Jeremy Corbyn.
I think there was a very important point made about people registering to vote before the 7th of June. I mean, in particular, young people, because young people have the biggest stake. You know, they have the longest future, and will be severely affected, I believe, if we leave and don't have those opportunities anymore. And a lot of people today have been talking about the facts that are being bandied around. The reality is that 90% of the economists that were asked said that this would make Britain worse off. The Treasury... Well, there's a simple reason...
This is exactly what this is talking about, isn't it?
But
bogus statistics
they're not bogus. They're not bogus statistics,
this is
Neil.
The same group.
This is about people's jobs and people's livelihoods.
This is the same...
And your leader, who I understand you were very keen on, Neil, said... He said that leaving
he is as keen on me as I'm keen on him.
He said that leaving the single market, a lower economic, worse economic outturn, lower incomes would be a price worth paying.
He's saying what matters is democracy.
Nigel
And democracy is worth paying.
All right.
Not that you would need to.
This is not the House of Commons. Don't shout at each other. You in the third row.
I'd like to pick up on something that Frank mentioned, talking about the day after. We've seen with the Scottish referendum and the divisions that have, been really deeply felt in Scotland and that have reverberated in British politics. We've seen with the example of the point scoring and the shouting over each other here. I don't agree with what the gentleman behind me said about the point... I do agree about the point scoring. I don't necessarily agree with his political point of view. I want to stay in Europe because I can foresee a future for myself and for my son where actually we need friends, we need to be mindful of the global position that we are going to be in. And the fact that, OK, it might be scary, it might be a step into the future that we don't know about, but actually surely going in with more cooperation, more understanding, more tolerance. I'm just really fearful that the day after, Britain will turn on itself.
Yeah, it's a real danger.
That people will turn on each other because of the...
Yeah.
Because of how...
I think that, you know, the decision had to come, and maybe actually the arrangements for the referendum were incredibly rushed, and is come as a surprise to most of the populace, and we probably needed a longer run into this for people to...
All right. Julie Lowry, let's just have your question, because we might just wrap up on that.
Are David Cameron's days as Prime Minister numbered?
Goes rather to the heart of what you're saying. Whatever happens, are David Cameron's days as Prime Minister numbered? Liz?
Well, in many ways, he's laid this path in progress, if you like, when he announced before the last election that this was going to be the last term that he was standing. And you can almost see the timing of this, everything falling into place, almost most unfortunately, that these sort of battles were bound to occur because he said that he wasn't going to stand any further. Exactly how that happens, I'll be quite honest with you, we'll have to wait to see what happens on the 23rd of June and see what happens after that.
But do you share her view, that the woman in the third row, that the country will turn on itself because of the vehemence with which this has been fought, or is it just normal politics?
It's interesting to compare with the situation of Scotland, of course, and what happened after the referendum there. What's interesting in Scotland is how much politics was energised by this. And we're seeing a much more lively conversation now than we were previously. One thing that I would like to say, because no one's referred to it, and the young lady down here over on my right mentioned this earlier on, we should be moving to include younger people, the age of 16, to be voting on these referendum.
Okay. All right. You on the right there, the man on the gangway. Are you under 16? No, you're over 16.
Yeah, I'm 17.
Oh, you're
so obviously,
not got the vote.
The referendum comes about 6 months before my 18th birthday.
Right.
So even though I have an opinionated view on the EU and know what I want to do, I still don't get a say. So it was voted against. The proposal to change the voting age was voted against by the House of Commons. So we talk about including young people, yet politicians voted against the inclusion of young people. So surely that's also disenfranchising young people more, because the politicians that run the country won't let them have a say.
Don't you have any old relation who'll lend their vote to you? Think about it. You should be able to do a trade-off.
Not exactly.
Not exactly.
My father doesn't
lawful
have
practices that are being spread here.
The person there in blue.
I do think that after the election, if we do decide to stay in, it doesn't matter who the Prime Minister is, it's all about can they reform the EU? And on previous experience, it doesn't seem that they can. So I'd be really keen to take that forward and see what reform can actually happen within the EU.
And you in the check shirt here.
Like Owen Jones has been saying all night, and the man just said about reform. As Frank rightly pointed out, that David Cameron, with the threat of Brexit, went to Brussels and was still unable to negotiate a good deal on our behalf. After we vote to stay, if we do, what negotiation power will we have then?
If we vote to stay. Owen Jones, what do you think?
Well, as I say, I don't think we should just leave it to the politicians. With the Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership, we, the people who the politicians exist to represent and serve, people campaigned on it and forced them to take action, to leave TTIP now lying in rubble. I'd like to see far more campaigning on that issue, on issues like that for democratisation and the rest. And just to go back, I suppose, to that danger of the country turning in on themselves. We live in a country which is very fragmented, full of anger and fury, a next generation who feel they're going to be worse off than the next, and people feel despair about politics. And that we've heard all the way through this campaign a lot of fear and despair, and I just think we should make a pact after this, whether it becomes to the European Union and the sort of Europe we want, or the sort of Britain we want. Instead of fear, instead of turning on each other, let's start having a politics based on hope that actually addresses everything from housing to jobs and wages, because we're not being offered that in this referendum.
All right. Liz Truss, we know there are a large number of MPs who want to change the leadership, even if he wins by a narrow figure or even by a large figure. What do you think will happen?
I don't think that is true. David Cameron's been an incredibly successful Prime Minister, an incredibly successful leader of the Conservative Party.
Why does Andrew Bridgen says that Cameron's at odds with half the party?
We've got a big agenda of social reform, and most of my generation, I went into Parliament in 2010. We've got a new generation in 2015 as well. We came into politics to see our position as a country improve, to reform our society, to help people get on in life. That's what motivates us. I don't get out of bed in the morning thinking about Europe. I get out of bed in the morning to think about how can we make Britain a more successful country? How can we reform our education system to give young people, like Frank's constituents, more opportunities?
Do you think
That's what I'm excited by. And frankly, on the 24th of June, I want us to vote to remain in the EU, and then I want us to get on with what is really important, some of these key challenges we've been talking about, like housing, like education, like health.
Yeah. But do you think it was necessary? Because the woman in the third row was suggesting this referendum only came about to heal divisions in the Tory party. Do you think actually it's in the national interest to have this referendum, from all the things we've heard?
There was a very good point made earlier by another audience member saying that this is an issue that has been festering in our country. There has been discontent. I agree that Europe does need further reform. I'm committed to achieving that, and we're working. And I've explained the types of things we're doing to achieve that.
You're at the back there.
But I think it's important we have this debate, and I think it's a healthy debate.
I'd also like to get out of bed in the morning and not have to think about the EU.
Liberation is on its way, don't worry.
Neil Hamilton.
Well, I think David Cameron's a pretty pointless individual, isn't he? He's had about as much influence on events as a cork bobbing on the water. Really, he just goes which way the tide goes. I mean, in a brief moment of candour after he became Tory leader, amazingly now 10 years ago, he let the cat out of the bag when he described himself as the heir to Blair. We haven't heard him saying that recently because the bottom fell out of the market in Blair's long ago. I think the tragedy of David Cameron is he doesn't really have many strong views on anything. I went into politics because I am motivated by strong beliefs. Very different from Owen's, but he's gone into politics because he's motivated by strong beliefs. And I want to see passion in politics. I want to see people who believe in things. We all believe in our different ways in improving the condition of the people and people's lives. But the people I really don't understand are those who just think they're there to sit in a chair and to get office rather than when they get there know what to do with it.
I have to stop you there because I've got 20 seconds left for you, Frank.
I think you're right about... I sense it's the end of the era for the Prime Minister, but you've set the agenda that it was necessary to have this referendum. It came with huge dangers, and whoever follows him it's a crucial factor now to try and unite the country, whatever the decision is, and I think whatever the decision is, both sides should accept it.
Okay. Thanks very much.